My name is Bill Lamar. It's been my pleasure to be the pastor of Metropolitan since April of last year. And I want to ask all the members of Metropolitan to please stand. And I want you to know that we're glad to have you in our home. You're standing on holy ground this morning. We're thankful for your presence. This is the oldest continuously held piece of property by African Americans in the District of Columbia. And what you feel in this house, amen, amen. Construction began in 1881, completed in 1886, and what you feel in this house is the presence of God and the presence of the ancestors, and we thank you very much for your presence. Allow me just to give us a bit of context for those who, throughout generations, have used this place and this space to fight for justice and freedom. The names that I'm going to call are persons who all have been in this particular building, in this space, fighting, speaking, wrestling, strategizing for justice. Mary McLeod Bethune, Daniel Alexander Payne, Henry McNeil Turner, Francis J. Grimke, Ida B. Wells Barnett, Anna Julia Cooper, Mary Church Terrell, John Mercer Langston, Kelly Miller, Booker T. Washington, Charles Chestnut, and William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, all in this space. So you're in holy ground. The ancestors for years have fought and struggled from this place, and we stand in that tradition. Let me say just a little bit about our panelists. We want to thank State's Attorney also Brooks and U.S. Attorney Machen and Professor Davis. I want us to, there's a book called The Price of the Ticket about black politics in the age of Obama. And we cannot sell black freedom for the optics of black people being elected. Having black people in office does not mean that we are free. Amen, somebody. But having black people in office who have not forgotten who they are, have not forgotten the struggle, and have not become unplugged from the communities that produce them, and who live and move and have the values of the communities, those people can help us to become free. And so State's Attorney also Brooks stands in the tradition of Harold Washington and Marion Barry as lovers of the people. Somebody say amen. And U.S. Attorney Machen stands in the tradition of Justice Marshall and Judge Newman, those appointed to do justice and to make sure that God's people are treated fairly. And Professor Davis stands in the tradition of A. Leon Higginbotham and Derek Bell and Lonnie Guinier, those who use their intellectual firepower to make sure that, amen, somebody, to make sure that the people of God are represented. And so we're thankful. Four things actually I think that we should do as a result of this panel, and I'll take my seat. One is we have to vote. Somebody say amen. We have to vote. Two, we have to hold elected officials and appointed officials accountable. Three, we cannot abdicate our responsibilities as citizens. You cannot not serve on juries. You cannot not show up to public meetings. Your presence puts pressure on the system to not forget the most vulnerable. And finally, in the words of Frederick Douglass, who was buried here and whose pew is over here to my left, agitate, agitate, agitate.
And if you want some more, 7:45 on Sunday or 11 o'clock on Sunday, I promise you will be blessed. Moving now to our second panel, in the interest of time, I'm going to abbreviate some of the introductions. Another phenomenal set of individuals who bring a tremendous amount of expertise. Just to go down the line alphabetically as I bring them up, Attorney J. Wendell Gordon from Baltimore. Amen. You can step on up. And J. Wendell Gordon, among many things, is known as the warrior lawyer. He has the type of zealous advocacy. This is the kind of person you want when your cousin, your family member is in trouble. I've told my wife, if I get in trouble, call J. Wendell. Call him. Don't delay, because he will humanize you and not allow the system to take advantage of you. The next person we'll bring to the table is Professor Chris Henning. Professor Chris Henning is a professor of law at Georgetown University Law School, and she is also the co-director of their Juvenile Justice Clinic, and again brings tremendous practical experience being in the courtrooms in and out. And then the final person, I think is an honor for all of us to have here, the newly elected and installed Attorney General for the District of Columbia, Attorney Carl Racine, whose bio, we could be here all day going down. We're just honored and blessed to have you here. We want to start similar as we did in the previous panel. I'm going to tell people in advance that if you have questions, if you still have cards, please just write them down on the cards. We may just need to go for the cards so that we can keep the things moving on time. We do have another workshop that we want to make sure we get to from the U.S. Attorney's Office, Surviving the Police Stop. You do want to be here for that. And if you know some young people who are home, they still got time to get here, call them up. They need to be here for that workshop. We'll start right now. Attorney Gordon, if you could just start and just, open the remarks.
All right. First of all, I want to say top of the morning to everybody here. Of course, my name is Angela J. Davis. I say that in the most respectful fashion, although my name actually is J. Wendell Gordon, but everything that Angela J. Davis said here today, I agree with 100% wholeheartedly. We think so much alike, and I learned that just by hearing you speak for the last couple of minutes. They say that justice is one of the most sincere expressions of love. So I can think of no better place to have this discussion than in Metropolitan AME Church. And I hope it is AME Church. Did I say that right? Make sure I didn't say Baptist Church. But at any rate, I want to thank Reverend Lamar. I want to thank my good friend, Jonathan Newton. I want to thank this distinguished panel who's assembled here today. Also, Angela Brooks, who's the state's attorney from the county in which I grew up. Ron Mashin is the state's attorney from the city in which I graduated high school, H.D. Woodson Warrior. So, Woodson Warrior over there? Okay, so it goes full circle. I'm a trial lawyer. I really love the law. If it wasn't my job, it would be my hobby. I love it that much. And I've been known to handle several cases across the state of Maryland. Most of my work is in the state of Maryland, although I'm licensed in D.C. federal court. The most notorious case that I've handled that you all have heard of is the case dealing with John Allen Muhammad, who was the D.C. sniper. He was my client, and it was a real learning experience for me to be involved in that case. All of you sitting here today believe that John Allen Muhammad is guilty of these offenses. And I'm not going to try to reprogram you today. I've been working on a book, okay? It's called Jury of Our Fears, and I'll be able to tell the real story, the untold story, the only person in the whole world who's actually spoken with him, who knows his thoughts and how he was thinking during the period of time. When I handled the case in Maryland dealing with John Allen Muhammad, it was a learning experience because I got an opportunity to see how the system can move to not just prosecute, but persecute an individual, eliminate all its rights, go up to every level of appeal, and let those injustices be upheld. And I have some strong feelings about that case. I'm not convinced, beyond a reasonable doubt, that he's guilty of these offenses. And I'll stand here in front of millions of people and say that. And one of my things to him was to ensure, for his children's sake and for everybody else's sake, that even if you don't agree with what I will tell in the future, that you will hear another side of the story, because the entire story hasn't been told. So ever since that case, I've been called upon to handle other high-profile cases in the state of Maryland. Some of you all may have heard of the Accokeek drag racing case. That was one of mine. I've had some other cases that you see on the news. I've been on the news several times before. And so my journey to justice has been a splendid journey in terms of the experiences that I've obtained, in terms of my advocacy, my belief that America is sick, but I'm willing to hold her hand until she gets better. And I think that we all should take on that commitment to hold America's hand until she gets better. And so when I was asked to come here today, I was elated for another opportunity to address people, lay people, who really are probably more or less spectators of the judicial process as opposed to participants. And I'm very excited to really be able to bring to you some of my experiences and what I think about the process and what we can do to A, protect ourselves, and B, make it better. Interestingly, just this week, one of the plans that I believe is very important is legislation. And just this week, I was in Annapolis pushing for some legislation in the state of Maryland dealing with what we have in Maryland called the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. Now, many of you all don't know about this, and I'm going to close it down real quick. But law enforcement officers are treated as elite citizens, in the state of Maryland at least. They have their own set of Bill of Rights. And one of the rights that they have in Maryland is that there's what's called a 10-day rule. When an officer commits a crime, or when an officer commits an offense of excessive force or something of that nature, where a person is killed or maimed or seriously injured, they have 10 days to obtain counsel before anyone can interrogate them. That is, you know, criminals on the street, they commit a crime, they get immediately brought into the office for interrogation. Officers have 10 days. So one of my goals or objectives is to repeal that 10-day rule. They also have additional rights. They cannot be interrogated while they're off duty. They can only be interrogated in their district. They have to have a lawyer present, or they can have a lawyer present. They can waive that right, but it's a really intricate process to waive it. If they don't obtain a lawyer within 10 days before the interrogation starts, they can have additional time to obtain counsel. So these are some of the rules, and I told the General Assembly, that is the head of the judiciary system, Judiciary Committee in Maryland, that the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights is one of the deadliest pieces of legislation since the repeal of the Death Penalty Act, since 1974, when it's been enacted. I believe that it's caused more deaths, or responsible for more deaths, and the lack of justice for more cases in the state of Maryland than our repealed Death Penalty Act during the period of time in which it was in effect. So those are some of the big issues that I'm challenging all of you all with, and I'm taking on this matter. I'm fighting this thing head on. I'm gathering a cadre of attorneys to join me, because some of us attorneys don't realize that it's our duty and responsibility to affect these types of change. I do. And so we're just going to continue to work forward to make some of these things happen. If nothing else, educate the public that these laws out here exist and they're doing us harm every day, for the periods of time that they exist. So thank you. I'm not going to hold you any longer, and I look forward to hearing what everybody else has to say.
Good morning, everyone. Let me join you in thanking Reverend Newton and Reverend Lamar for bringing us together. I cannot tell you how important it is for us to have these conversations, for prosecutors, defense attorneys, community activists, and young people to be present and participating in this conversation. And I really hope that maybe some of the young people will speak out and participate in this conversation. By way of introduction, let me just say a word about how I became passionate about juvenile justice and how I became passionate about advocating for children. I have always had a heart and a calling for working with young people at risk. And when I went to law school, I thought I was going to go and represent children in the abuse and the neglect system, or in education advocacy, or the like. But quickly, I realized that these children in the abuse and neglect system, and these children who had deficits in their education, were the very same children who were ending up in the delinquency system. But the difference was folks didn't want to represent them. Folks didn't want to advocate for them. They wanted to work for the kids who are cute in the abuse and neglect system. So I decided, this is my calling. I want to be a public defender. And so when I graduated from law school, I went to the DC, when I graduated from law school, I actually went to Georgetown after law school and did a 2-year Prettyman Fellowship, which is a fellowship for aspiring public defenders. From there, I went on to the Public Defender Service and helped develop and establish a juvenile unit in which a number of attorneys got together and decided that as a specialty, we wanted to represent children. in the delinquency system. And in particular, we wanted to do it from this holistic lens. We've heard the state's attorneys talk about holistic advocacy. And holistic advocacy is important from the defender lens as well. So not only do we represent the kid in the legal case, but we're also looking at the child social services, access to opportunity in the community writ large, educational programming, housing and the like. So that's what our model for juvenile representation has been at the DC Public Defender Service. And then in 2001, I decided that it was time to leave, not because I didn't want to continue to represent children, but because I wanted to do more. I wanted to do systemic reform. So I went on to Georgetown Law School, where I am a clinical professor. I'm the co-director of the Juvenile Justice Clinic, which means I continue to represent kids in DC Superior Court today. But in addition to that, I'm able to do legislative advocacy. I'm able to do research and writing around issues of adolescence and delinquency. I'm able to do systemic reform, sit at the table with folks, like Carl Racine, and we're so happy to have him joining us in the juvenile justice system and the fight for reform in the juvenile justice system. So, and to answer the question about what have I been struck by most as I have been practicing since 1995, one of the things that I've been most struck by is something that folks begin to talk about on that last panel, and that is the tremendous overrepresentation of African Americans in the juvenile justice system, right here in the District of Columbia. Like many folks, I came from the South. I came from North Carolina. You go into the courthouse, there are white folks and black folks in cuffs, right? I went from there to Connecticut. There are white folks and black folks in cuffs. You go to DC Superior Court and Juvenile Court, I tell you, and over 14 years of representation, I've represented 2 white kids, ever, okay? So forget my anecdote. 2010, 95% of juveniles arrested in the District of Columbia were African American. That doesn't even include the Latinos, right, that are coming into the court system. So we have to ask ourselves why it is that there is such an incredible disparity. And I'm in all seriousness, I came here and I thought, oh, maybe all the white people live in the suburbs, and that the reason that I don't see any non-black folks or non-black and brown children in the courthouse is because for the geographic line of DC must be all black. No, I did my research and it's actually not true. So that there are, this is a diverse community right here in the District of Columbia. So when we get into questions and answers, I really want to talk more about this question of race disparity in adolescence.
Thank you very, very much. My name is Carl Racine. I have the great honor to be this wonderful city's first elected Attorney General. And I see so many friends, and indeed, I always carry family with me, and family members here, so it really is an honor to be on this panel and to have listened to the prior panel. Let me tell you just a little bit about myself, about the Office of Attorney General, and my perspective coming in. I think you'll see that the perspective that I have coming in will certainly be informed by prosecutorial experience and background, but in a full way and real way, my experience is that of a criminal defense lawyer who represented kids and who fundamentally believed in every regard, as I was trained to by Ms. Angela Davis, that every kid's life matters and that our system owes it to the kid to try as best we can to make sure that the criminal justice system not only focuses, when we're talking about kids, on conviction and punishment, but indeed focuses on its most important responsibility, and that is rehabilitation of children. Basically my background is that of a defender. I can tell you I've never had the experience of prosecuting any individual in court, although I understand from the last 2 weeks my office indeed has prosecuted many kids. Fundamentally, as I'm looking at our juvenile justice function in the office. And I should make a point here. Ron Machin very expertly got up and told you about his various responsibilities as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. One note of privilege. I will tell you that having worked against prosecutors here in the District of Columbia, including U.S. attorneys, it really has been a new day with respect to the dealings with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. That doesn't mean that every decision is a decision that I'm going to agree with when I'm representing my clients, but one thing is for certain, and I hear this every day, and that is that Ron Machin and Vincent Cohen and his team, they will always hear you out. And Professor Davis, you told the story, as you're being the chief, the director of the Public Defender Service, not having an occasion to actually engage on a principal discussion with the U.S. Attorney. Well, thankfully, we have a prosecutor in place who not only regularly interacts with the stakeholders, but meets lawyers and clients when they really need to be seen. So it is a good day here in the District of Columbia. 3 points that I really want to make very briefly, and then of course we'll get into the Q&A. As I'm reviewing the juvenile justice system here and our role as the elected Attorney General in D.C., I see 3 real issues. Number 1, there is a lack of transparency. Now, I want everybody to recognize that the juvenile justice system is a system that is confidential. It's not as public as it is for adults. The reason why the juvenile justice system is intended to be confidential is because we believe the thought leaders who created the criminal justice system, armed with the science that kids are different than adults, that kids, because of their youth, frankly, their formation, the slow formation of brains, are more susceptible to peer culture, more susceptible to be impulsive, and otherwise more prone to make bad decisions. It's for that reason that fundamental to the criminal justice system as it regards kids is the commitment of the prosecutor and the system to be fundamentally about rehabilitation. That's going to be what we're focused on during my tenure at the Attorney General's office. That's 1. Transparency. 2, data. What I have seen so far in our office is that we have a lot of strides to go moving forward. There is an absence of real data, information that would give us a better idea regarding the varied defendants and respondents who come into our court, as well, very importantly, as an ability to analyze the services that are being provided to our kids. So I really need your help as I go to the City Council to ask the Council to provide our office with the resources so that we can truly analyze the data and use the data in a way that not only would provide for greater safety in the District of Columbia, but as importantly, provide for the best opportunity for our kids to learn from their mistakes and benefit from the services that we, as a city, owe our children. So that's number 2. The last piece I want to say is, as we're honoring Martin Luther King Jr., there is so much to praise MLK for. One area that's really not explored enough, in my opinion, is that Martin Luther King played an extraordinary role in the empowerment, voters' rights of the citizens of the District of Columbia. We ascended to statehood, home rule charter, only a few years after Martin Luther King passed, because Martin Luther King was a strong advocate for our right to vote. Our right to vote, particularly now that you're electing an Attorney General who has the solemn responsibility for treating kids in a way that would put them in a better position to succeed is so important. And I do want you to please not only help me as I advocate for resources for kids before the council, but hold me accountable in regards to the decisions that we make. I look forward to participating on a panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. All right, I'm going to put a couple things on the table and ask all of you to respond individually as you see fit. One, in dealing with the juvenile justice system, one of the things that the public has to deal with lately is, and some would call it a media influence, fear of juveniles. That every day on TV, on YouTube, on all these different things, different forms of media, we see incidents of kids assaulting kids, of kids assaulting adults, of kids engaging in all types of violent acts that really make people afraid. And so there is a desire for some enforcement of it. Then on the other hand, when we look at incidents like, for instance, a few years ago, the Jena 6, where you have kids who were in an environment that was really charged, and white kids who did some things and black kids who did some things, but the black kids found themselves suddenly facing these severe criminal penalties. And then as an institution, so that disparity, that racial disparity, the fear, public fear, the racial disparity, but then also just a change in the system over the years, where we're seeing more teenagers, as the Attorney General noted, that kids are very, he didn't use this word, but my word, they lack a certain degree of maturity. They're still developing, and so they're susceptible, as he said. As we see all of this increase in kids being pushed out of the juvenile system and into the adult system, how does the system deal with that so that our kids are given the opportunity to grow up healthy? 3 different issues that probably mirrors your platform. Please, everyone address them, and then we can move to the questions.
That was a million questions. But actually, it's a perfect way to start. And let me try to start answering that question by using a case example. And actually, I'm going to use 2 case examples. I'm going to tell you a quick story about Eric, and then a quick story about a kid named Mark. So Eric was a young man that I represented a few years ago. I first heard about Eric's story when I read in the newspaper, teenager brings Molotov cocktail into DC schools. It was, outrage, drew a lot of attention. I'm looking at the news thinking, wow, this is serious. Lo and behold, I go to court the next day. Who gets appointed to represent him? I do. Turns out this was a typical 13-year-old boy who had been watching a movie. He sees someone making a Molotov cocktail in the movie. He says to himself, I would like to make something that looks like that. It's cool. He doesn't research it on the internet. He doesn't ask anybody how to make it. He just runs into his kitchen. He grabs a glass bottle, and he starts pouring liquids in it. Pine salt, dish detergent, whatever he can find in the kitchen, bleach, and then he tapes it up. He tapes it up with black tape so it looks right. All right? His mother comes home. He doesn't want to spill it on his mother's carpet. He doesn't want his mother upset. He slaps it in his school book bag. This was a Saturday night. He doesn't think anything about it. Monday morning comes, he grabs his book bag, he walks into the school, not even realizing it's there. Security guard sees him going through the metal detector, right, and says, what is this? And he says, oh, that's nothing, you can throw that away. Kid goes on into his classroom. Little did he know that was the beginning of a tremendously long ordeal in the juvenile justice system. He was pulled out of his classroom, he was interrogated by the police, he was charged with arson. I don't remember saying anything about a fire, but he was charged with arson and possession of a Molotov cocktail. Okay, and he stayed in the juvenile justice system, got excluded from school, and we continued to represent him for 9 months. Let's fast forward, all right? A few months later, state of Connecticut, a young boy we will call Mark. Well, Eric was an African-American male, Mark is a white male. Their stories are almost identical. Mark learns about a Molotov cocktail, decides he wants to make something that looks like it. He takes it to school to show it off to his friends at school. Of course, the teachers find it. They're absolutely outraged. What do the teachers do in Connecticut with Mark? They call his parents. okay? They call his parents, they have a teachers meeting, the teachers, the counselors, the behavioral tech, and what do? They sit down together and they come up with an academic plan that is more particularly tailored to his unique interest in science, okay? There's no police, there's no arrest, there's none of that. I could not make this stuff up. The disparities in how we think about our black children and how we think about other children. So how is it that we could find ourselves in that space? So let me hit 3 quick points myself. One is reiterating some of this stuff that we've learned about adolescent development. Second thing I want to talk about is this notion of implicit bias. Right? Implicit racial bias and how it affects decision makers throughout the system. And then third, just talk for a second about community alternatives. So with regard to adolescence, I mean, you hit it beautifully. I so love having a prosecutor who understands adolescence. The difference between Mark and Eric was that the folks who were working with with Mark in Connecticut understood the basics of adolescent development. Within the last 25 to 30 years, there has been a tremendous increase in research on adolescence and delinquency. What we know is there's a series of brain studies that tell us that our brains do not fully develop until the 25th year. Anybody in here under 25? You got some time, okay? You got some time to do some more stupid stuff, okay? So your brains don't develop until the 25th year, and the last part of the brain to develop is the frontal lobe, which is the CEO of the brain. It's the part that helps us figure out planning, problem solving, cognitive development, impulse control. The psychological literature takes that one step further and shows, indeed, the children don't have the same cognitive capacity to engage in that high-order weighing of the pros and the cons. They don't think ahead to the future. So they're like Eric and Mark, right, who couldn't see ahead. If I put this in my bag, if I take this to school, there's likely to be a scare where I'm likely to freak everyone out, right? They don't think ahead. That poor decision-making that Carl talked about is exacerbated when there's peer influence, right? Children run in packs and they do what their friends do, right? They have poor risk perception, right? They don't understand the risk involved, and even when they do understand the risk involved, what do? They like it. They have a high preference for risks, right? They want to show off, right? They want to take that chance, all right? So then, the poor decision making is further exacerbated in communities where children are hungry, where they have high victimization, right? Where they're particularly exhausted, okay? And that's very, very common in our communities. Poor educational deficits, decision making becomes even harder, all right? And then the most important thing that we want to talk about when we think about the research on adolescent development is that children are highly resilient. They are highly responsive to redirection and guidance. Even your worst knucklehead, all right, can be, redirected by family members, by churches, by schools, by communities. And we can be doing that redirection without the court system, all right? So why is it that you have an Eric who gets referred to court and you have a Mark who gets, handled in the school system? And that brings us to this notion of implicit bias, right? I've already talked about the statistics. Why is it that 95% of kids in the District of Columbia who get arrested are African American? It is about what the research shows in implicit racial bias. What the studies show is that decision makers all along the continuum are less willing or unwilling to see youth and adolescence as a mitigating factor in deciding how to respond to what children do, okay? All right, so then you've got young people like Eric who are in the school system, and you've got to make a decision. So there have been studies on implicit bias that show that decision makers across the continuum are, one, less likely to be forgiving or to excuse adolescent misbehavior when children are involved. They are more likely to see children as mature and calculating. What did we just talk about? All the stuff about adolescence? That goes out the window. They are described as violent, mature, calculating. And the studies show that when children of color are involved, folks are more interested in punishment and less interested in rehabilitation. And so I'm not going to bore you with the nuances of the studies. You all should look at them, but there's one fascinating study that affects all of us that is really important. In 2012, there was a study on implicit bias and the public perception of, you may be familiar with this, but it affects the impact of implicit bias on our public perception of juveniles in the system. And this study solicited participants from all over and gave them a fact pattern, a very violent, aggressive fact pattern. Now, before allowing them to read the fact pattern, they educated folks on all the stuff that we just gave you in 2 minutes on adolescent development, right? So they educated folks on adolescent development, gave them a violent fact pattern, and then asked them whether or not the child should be transferred to adult court or what their sentence should be. Half of the participants in the study were told that their suspect in that fact pattern was African American. The other half of the participants were told that their suspect was white. You all can guess what the outcome of that study was. Over and over again, when the African American was the perpetrator, folks, public perception, that means you and me, public perception was that the young person should be transferred to adult court and receive the most severe sentence. What I think is amazing about the panel that we just saw, U.S. Attorney Machen, just the number of African American folks in this room in positions of leadership, that we still have the same disparities in our city. And what the implicit bias research shows that it doesn't matter, right? That it doesn't matter what your race is, it doesn't matter what your political ideology is, that implicit bias still affects us. So that prosecutors, black, brown, blue, green, still have to do the same level of work. So let me stop there and just say the last point that I wanted to make was about prosecutorial discretion, to tie us back to that last panel, that we all have a lot of work to do to educate. And we could talk more specifically about strategies. Attorney Machen talked about standards, and I think ADA Alsobrooks also talked about standards. We can talk more about how do you incorporate understanding of implicit bias into prosecutorial standards, how do you incorporate understanding of adolescent development into prosecutorial standards.
Well, that was a mouthful. Fear of the juvenile, I believe the question that's the root of the question. And I think that I've always said that it seems like today it's a crime to be a kid. Because the things that we used to do as kids, even with my contemporaries, we didn't get arrested for it. We would get in schoolhouse fights. We wouldn't get arrested. We would touch a girl inappropriately. Not saying that it's right or wrong, but all of you all were young once, and we did that. It wasn't a criminal offense. People will pull you up about it, tell you it's wrong, not to do it again. You didn't do it again. Your life didn't have to be destroyed. I didn't have to fight those issues when I wanted to become an attorney or when I made that decision to become an attorney. So, what is the problem? That is, what are some of the problems? I can't tell you what the whole problem is because it's multifaceted, and I don't have all the answers. But I do see one thing as a major problem, and it is the images. It is the images that we see on the news every night. It is, I call it the black attack. Black people are being attacked in high places and low places and every place in between, from our politicians to our school teachers, lawyers, doctors, whatever. There's no realm, our pastors, no one is exempt from the attacks. Now, at the end of these cases, a lot of times we find out that these individuals may have committed some minor offense, but they're going to jail for a long time. Another problem is the music. And I know a lot of us like rap music. I was a go-go guy, so I really wasn't into it when I was coming up. I got into it a little bit later. But the images, the music, what we're talking about, the materialism, the objectification of women, the self-hate, the in this and in that, nobody should call anybody an in. I don't care if you're black or white. I despise the term. I despise it 100%. But our kids face so much pressure today. I'm glad to be over 40 because they didn't have the internet back then to document the dumb stuff that I used to do back in the dumb stuff. Yeah, it's the dumb stuff. I said stuff. That, you know, but these kids have that issue to bear, you know. They can go on the internet and see anything. They can see these brawls with other kids from across the country. They're exposed to these things. These things are shaping the way that they feel about the things that they see. When we were growing up, the music, we used to sing, you know, music about being in love, about my girl. Now these guys singing about their boys and being in the club. I mean, that's what the music is singing about. So this is the mentality that we all have, that our young people have. And I think it's going to take a lot of work. There are a lot of mental health issues out here today. We got children whose parents are incarcerated, and they're left to fend for themselves how to figure this thing out or how to be a man, or they're left with their grandmother. And there's a lot of stuff, poor health. I mean, poor health, poor nutrition, and the list goes on and on and on. But in terms of fearing the juvenile, it's really gotten out of hand, because as we indict those who we feel have done wrong, those who are completely innocent fall within the talons of our system. Anecdote: I was representing a kid from Montgomery County. He's riding a bicycle, just riding down the street. Bike doesn't have brakes on it, but you know how we are sometimes. We improvise. We do the Fred Flintstone thing. We drag our feet, right? Well, anyway, apparently this police officer sees him riding in Montgomery County without a helmet. In Montgomery County, you have to be, unless you're 16 years of age, you have to wear a helmet when riding your bicycle. Well, the police run up on this kid in their police cruiser, pull in front of him. He has to navigate himself outside of the way of the police car. He doesn't have any brakes, so he ends up going down this hill. And when he gets down the hill, there's another police officer down at the bottom of the hill. What do? They pull a gun out on him. You must know about that case. Huh? That's exactly what they did. Similar cases. They pulled a gun out of a 16-year-old kid for riding a bicycle without a helmet. Black kid. So these are the fights that we deal with, I've been dealing with for the last 20 years since I've been practicing law. But I'm so happy that everybody is now open to hearing these anecdotes, because they really shape the narrative and let you know how bad it is out here. Your kids have it bad out here. And it's nothing like you would ever understand unless you're really kind of doing what we're doing and kind of observing the system. They need to be protected. And one of the ways I've been going around talking about how we can protect our kids, and do I have another 2 minutes or what? 2 minutes. I have to tell you this real quick. My name is J. Wendell Gordon, and by the end of the day, if you don't learn anything else from J. Wendell Gordon, I want you to learn that our kids have these smartphones, right? And all of our kids have smartphones that have a video recording device and an audio recording device. Is that right? Do you all have smartphones? Hold them up for me. Let me see them. Everybody's got a smartphone. Hold them up, especially my young people. If you have a smartphone, on your smartphone, I want you to learn how to use the audio recording device, because that's very important, especially if you're operating an automobile. When you see those blue lights come on behind you, remember this. I'm not playing, I'm serious, because this is very serious. You turn on that audio recording device, you press record on it. And even if you're afraid, put it in your pocket, especially when you're in the state of Maryland. Put it in your pocket. And when those blue lights come on before, you make sure it's on, and when the police officer stops you, you make sure you record that entire stop. This is good for 2 reasons. The first reason is good because you can advise your kids as to what they may have done wrong or what they could have done better. That's the first reason. That's the political correctness part of it. The second reason is that you create critical pieces of evidence that we as defense attorneys can use in the court of law. And I have a case right now where an individual has done that. His stop, he was pulled over for a busted tail light. At the end of the stop, he was charged with trying to disarm a police officer, resisting arrest, and all sorts of other heinous acts. We presented this information to the prosecutor, and they're in the process of dismissing these charges. But had he not had that information to present to a prosecutor, he would have been going to jail for a very long period of time, because his word means little to nothing against the word of a police officer. So you can imagine your teenager means even that much less against the word of a police officer. So unless you have independent witnesses which are afraid to come to court, because you know what? They talk about stop snitching, but police intimidation is very real. And a lot of times, the story that's not being told to you all is that the reason why a lot of individuals don't want to call the police is because they end up getting arrested for something completely different, or they end up getting intimidated for something else, or they're not adequately protected in the witness protection program. So there are a lot of problems with the system that they want to tell you. This is stop stitching thing, and the rules should apply to everybody, including the police. Stop stitching, stop snitching in the police departments. Good police officers, they claim they're out there, but every time I see a video, I see a bad police officer beating somebody and all the good police officers standing around doing nothing. So who is the good one and who is the bad one? Now, I'm not trying to bash the police because I know there are good police officers out there. My cousin happens to be a good police officer, I hope. But we have this debate all the time. So we have to bring the police to a level of take them off this elite status, stop this police warship stuff, okay? There's nothing wrong with respecting police officers. I get that. And I'm not even opposed to that. But all this police worship, when you know they've done wrong, you cannot support bad police. Thank you.
I just want to follow up a little bit on the implicit bias point and just urge each of you, there are a number of studies out there that are easily taken via the internet. And I will tell you how horrified I have been myself when I've taken those race implicit bias as well as gender implicit bias studies. I mean, in reality, as we talk about implicit bias, to be very honest, in the District of Columbia, where we talked about the demographics generally and the demographics in court, my strong hunch is that black folk probably, just in my life experience, they really don't see it that differently when it comes to the misconduct of youth as do white folk. Okay? I have seen this certainly out there in the campaign trail as I'm out there talking not about getting tough on crime, but about focusing on smart restorative and rehabilitation justice. Even in our community, there is oftentimes a sense of disbelief or lack of faith that we can actually come together as a community, certainly with the help of the court services, etc., to change a kid's life. I'm here to tell you that that's holding us back. We must, as a community, believe in the true redemptive power that positive people, adults, can have in the lives of our children. So I would urge each of us to really look to partner together in regards to the reformation of our children. Another point on implicit bias I think is very important, and I'm looking at the U.S. Attorney's Office folks again. You heard about all they're doing in the community. I can tell you that to date, prior to even still now, the Office of Attorney General has not been out there in the community. We've been a missing partner in the community of criminal justice issues, certainly as impacts our kids. That is something that must change, and you will see us out there, and it's very important to be out there. It's also very important to have diverse prosecutors. With respect to my fellow prosecutors in my office, I can tell you that when you go through the Office of Attorney General, you see diversity in many of the offices. Quite honestly, the diversity does not exist in juvenile prosecutions, okay? So once again, there's an area for just direct engagement to tackle what I see as a lack of understanding, sensitivity, understanding of our community. And so again, hold my feet to the fire. I hope I have the record that U.S. Attorney Machen has in 4 years, where 40% of my prosecutors, particularly those in the juvenile section, are far more diverse than when I started. The last point I really want to focus on with a story is about the story of positive engagement in the lives of kids. Back in my day, when I was a public defender service lawyer, I picked up a case that I read about as well in the Metro section. It was an incident that occurred at a shop at a place called the Kilimanjaro. Any of you old heads here? Okay, look at you, proud, all right. So the Kilimanjaro in Adams Morgan was a club that had a lot of great music. Caribbean music was the style of the day, reggae for sure, and to be sure, it was a club for adults. So, you know, you had to be 21 to get in there. Well, I picked up a case on a Monday that involved a 13-year-old girl who had been in that club. She had been drinking. She had a substance abuse problem, alcohol, and she was, you know, partying hard. At the end of that evening, she got into a taxi cab. Sure enough, as it turned out, the taxi cab driver tried to physically abuse her, rape her. As it turned out, that young lady had a jackknife in her purse. She pulled that jackknife out and prevented the sexual assault. Some people at the Public Defender Service, when I went back to my office, I was nervous about the case. They said, "Hey, Carl, that cab driver deserves some stabbing." Okay? I don't know about that. All I know is that that young lady was charged with assault with intent to kill because she sought to defend herself. Okay? We were able to persuade the court that it need not go forward with prosecution of the case because we had put together, through the Public Defender Service, a program for her for the next 12 months. The program entailed her staying for 3 months at GW, George Washington University, over the summer in a high-intense academic environment. She stayed in a dorm. It required her to test for other schools because she wasn't doing so well at her local high school. She did that. She excelled at the GW program. She excelled in her standardized tests. She ended up getting a full scholarship to a fancy prep school in New Jersey, graduated 1 year early, Duke University, Duke doctor, okay? That story at the Kilimanjaro, that could have ended a completely different way, okay? The only thing that saved that girl's life was that, fortunately, there was an organization that was organized in a way that it could actually submit a comprehensive plan to a judge to say, "Hey, judge, don't prosecute, let's follow this other course of treatment." Those are the kinds of treatments and regimens that don't involve a jail, that don't involve, you know, meeting folks who are going to teach you how to be a better criminal, that we need to replicate throughout our system. And so once again, I really want each of you to help me as I focus juvenile justice, as we're obligated to, on rehabilitation as much as simply prosecution. Thank you.
And before my brother asks this question, I just want to ask, we've had a few that have come in from the internet. I want to tie a couple of them in together, and I'm going to invite U.S. Attorney Mate, Vince Cohen, either one of you, if you can address this question. But one of the people actually submitted, according to the National Institutes of Health, looking at mental illness, they say that many of our children by age 14 have developed mental illness for various reasons, and this ties into some of the other questions dealing with parents or often fathers who are dealing with reentry, for dealing with some of the demographic issues that I think Professor Henning alluded to, the fact that many of them are hungry, many of them are tired, and so they actually have mental disorders that they're dealing with as they go about these acts that get them in trouble. What type of activities does your office have, or will your office have, that can create the types of diversions that you mentioned or that they offered for the student in Connecticut who had that science interest? What type of diversionary programs or alternatives are there for these people with mental health?
Yeah. Well, so sorry. Very briefly, from...
Now he can't shut you up.
That's right, I got his mic, exactly. No, very briefly, I think to say it charitably, our office can do a lot more in the area of really understanding the young child, the young person who comes into our courtroom. You mentioned it. I mean, if you're a 15-year-old kid and you live in a household where, getting a decent meal doesn't readily occur, where there aren't enough responsible adults in your lives, where there's music and this TV is going on all day long, where the group that you hang with because you're attracted to them and because you're afraid of them has guns, then you're dealing with a young person who is suffering from trauma. And our systems, as we, I'm telling you truthfully, as we're dealing with it right now, don't deal well with the complex trauma that a kid comes into the system with. And so these are the types of things that really need the city council and others to really help us out with as we seek to understand this patient, okay? And then better be able to service that young person.
So can I just say, one, that there is a lack of services. There's a tremendous need for more services. So many of you know that everybody knows about St. Elizabeth's, right? Well, St. Elizabeth's used to have an adolescent ward that closed down years ago. So there are very, very few beds in the District of Columbia for a child who is in a mental health crisis or the like. There's likewise even less beds for a child who is really addicted or who is addicted to drugs and in need of inpatient counseling and the like. So the Psychiatric Institute of Washington is pretty much one of the only places remaining in the District of Columbia for inpatient bed space. So there needs to be a tremendous reallocation of resources from traditional law and order responses to facilities and resources like these, among others. The other thing that many people don't know in the District of Columbia, that children who are in severe need of mental health services are sent out of the jurisdiction. And I don't mean to Maryland or to Virginia, I'm talking about to Minnesota, right? To Arizona and the like. And I believe that DYRS is definitely on Attorney Razine's agenda items, but one of the things is how do we bring our kids back home to serve them in the communities where they're going to return to? So.
And let me just add, part of that is our community, once again, we have to stand up and be heard and say, we want our kids, even the kids who have committed serious misdeeds, we want them rehabilitated, we want them serviced here, okay? Because these kids will go to places in Pennsylvania and other states where, quite honestly, the record, if you can find it, of corrective services, the result is not at all that good. It's just what's been done over the past several decades. So we really need everybody to go out there and advocate for community-based treatments. Because after all, where is that young boy or young girl gonna go back to after 3 years in Minnesota? Probably right back here. So you might as well take advantage of what we have, which is a strong and loving community, and allow that kid to learn how to operate lawfully in the community that is his and hers.
Thank you, sir. The gentleman here was ready. I'm going to ask for the other persons at the microphone, the two behind this gentleman and these, to write your questions down so that we can try to wrap them into one. We are more than slightly behind schedule, and we do need to move into the next part of the presentation. There are people downstairs at the tables, again, from the U.S. Attorney's Office, from the Metropolitan Police Department, and from the 2nd District of the AME Church's Health Ministry that are downstairs with more information about some of these issues. But again, if you could just write your questions down so that we can try to address them and move into the next part of the presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm Judge Burnett from the Superior Court, person that helped set up the youth court operations back in 1995, and I'm the current president of the DC Youth Court of the District of Columbia. And we are in the process now of talking with the schools about school discipline to prison pipeline. And where we have nonviolent offenses, rather than arresting the kids, refer them to youth court on a citation or summons system to avoid the stigma of having even been a juvenile arrested. And in addition, I also am the Chief Executive Officer of the National African American Drug Policy Coalition. And we have entered a discussion with the youth court that where the parental supervision of the child who is referred is deficient, that we will provide counselor mentors to them 12, 13 years of age to get them grown so they don't reoffend again. I've talked to some advisors to our new Attorney General about meeting with him and working with him to establish a way to close this door of youth discipline. So I'd like to get calls for you on that, and I'd like to meet with you in person to outline to you our program. Second question, and I'll sit down, is legalization of marijuana. We have a significant concern about, you might say, black marketing of marijuana to our youth and the impact it will have on their education. And we have two questions in that connection. Will it in fact numb their intellectual ability and scholarship and lead to more kids dropping out of school and retard the education of our children? How are we going to deal with legalization of marijuana in this city when it will filter into the hands of the 16 and 17 and 18-year-olds, like the young girl you represented, who may then be a little bit high on smoking and end up in our juvenile justice system unless we take a serious look at that problem. Sure. Those are our two concerns, and I'd like to have a long conversation with you about it. I've spent 41 years on the bench. Many of you don't know me because I've been, like Teddy Roosevelt, speak quietly but carry a big stick. I spent 10 years as a prosecutor. I've been a member of the bar here for 56 years. I'm the black lawyer in D.C. that desegregated the bar of the District of Columbia in 1958.
Judge Burnett, your big stick precedes you. No, thank you very much for your comments. I certainly look forward to working with you on the matter of the youth court. And, to be very, very honest with you, I mean, the issue with Initiative 71 and the legalization of marijuana is extraordinarily complex, to say the least, and certainly should not be seen as, an endorsement of the use of marijuana for young kids. There is no doubt that with all that's going on in the lives of our kids and so many of the kids who come into the criminal justice system, the last thing that needs to be added to that life is marijuana. I hear you there. Don't be fooled, though. Notwithstanding the fact that there's a lot of marijuana out there being smoked, when you talk to people in the criminal justice system, what they'll tell you is that the marijuana is a problem, so are the synthetic drugs. And so the whole idea of really informing our kids as to how important it is for their brains to be clear, not fuzzy, so that they can grow and develop and relish in the life of learning is very, very important. I look forward to working with you.
Yeah, and I too echo that sentiment, except, and I'm going to speak for the state of Maryland because I kind of disagree with the non-legalization of marijuana, so I'll just stick to my jurisdiction. As it stands today, even with the proposals that are being discussed in our General Assembly, kids are not legally able to purchase marijuana. That is, people under the appropriate age are not legislatively able to purchase marijuana. Now, does that stop kids from obtaining marijuana? No more than it stops them from obtaining access to marijuana today. So that is the issue. Now, when these young people, our people, get arrested for these marijuana offenses, I am in full support of legalizing marijuana. It's just, it took so long for them to do it. I guess enough white people had to get arrested for it for them to change the law. But I've always been in support of it because I've seen too many times when an individual has to carry this conviction and stigma with him for the rest of his life. For instance, if he does want to become an attorney or a nurse or someone in the healthcare field, this stuff is going to create an ugly blemish on his or her record, and that could have been the first time that they've ever been involved in it, or it could have been the 50th time. I don't know, but nevertheless, I think that our marijuana laws in the state of Maryland, most respectfully, are quite draconian, and they need to legalize it in my state. Thank you. You don't have to clap for me.
And I do just a point of correction. It is downstairs, the DC Office of Police Complaints, not the Metropolitan Police Department. Just a few hard deadlines that we have to live by. For those of you, we made parking available. That garage will close in 1 hour and 5 minutes. We need to give the U.S. Attorney's Office at least a half hour to do their presentation. And then we want to make sure that people have opportunities. We have a few refreshments and things downstairs. I'm not sure if you all wrote your questions down. We do have some questions here that I want to address those. And if you can pass your questions up, we'll try to get to all of them. We'll ask our panelists to be brief in their remarks, and then we can continue to move in the direction that we need to go. And to combine these, some of these are indeed somewhat similar, and I'm going to leave one of them to the U.S. Attorney's Office because it's dealing with the police interaction with youth. We're asking about the connection between education, difficulties in schools, and then a school to prison pipeline. And what can you do to bring more attention to these issues? Let me do this. Because you've already addressed it, I believe, in several times. You've mentioned that you want to go to the city council, that we all have to be involved. And I think the Attorney General has made this point. I think that all of the panelists have pretty much made the point that we need to be involved, and that the city council will, we need to pressure the city council, rather, to provide the resources to his office. He is aware of some deficiencies. He's mentioned it, and he wants to address them, and I hope that we can do that. So some of the questions that are dealing with those situations, we want to do it that way, that we need to provide that type of connection. I'm going to have now.
Could I just say?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Sure.
Just
we have closing remarks from each of you, and then we'll have Pastor Lamar.
Just one point on the education piece. It's so critically important. Juvenile crime generally in the United States is following the same trend as adults, in that the crime itself, incidence of crime, is decreasing. Nonetheless, the statistics are very clear. Where we don't have kids graduating from junior high or high school, you know where they're going to end up. They're going to end up right in the criminal justice system. And so the clear nexus between failing in school and the criminal justice system remains. Ward 7 and Ward 8 are the wards in D.C. where, if you look at the trends in crime, while those two wards are also decreasing in crime, they are not as much as the other wards, and it's directly attributable to attendance in schools as well as success in school.
Let me make just two comments in closing. One is that we need children's advocates. I think a comment was made earlier that there are a lot of black public defenders, a lot of black defenders, and there are. But I got to tell you that we desperately need more diversity on behalf of children in juvenile defense in particular. It's an issue that hasn't been raised. I partner, my clinic, the Georgetown Juvenile Justice Clinic, partners with the National Juvenile Defender Center, and we do an annual boot camp for juvenile defense attorneys from across the country. And we are desperate to get young lawyers, new folks who are interested in this field to come and advocate on behalf of children. To this day, well, I should start and say, in 1967, the Supreme Court said that every child had a right to counsel in the juvenile delinquency system. Believe it or not, I will shock you, there are, to this day, children throughout this country who still do not have access to counsel. It's either because they are being talked into waiving their right to counsel to save the jurisdiction money, or because resources are so limited, caseloads are so high, conditions are so difficult that defenders effectively cannot represent children. Another critical issue is that in some jurisdictions, notwithstanding the right to free counsel, children are being asked to pay a fee for their counsel. These are children who can't afford advocates. So this is a critical issue, particularly in the juvenile defense community. The second comment that I want to make is just to reiterate, because I really want to, just to reiterate this comment, this theme that has come up, this need for community-based intervention. In case you hadn't figured out, I'm the professor on the panel, and I believe in research. I'm not speaking out of politics. I'm not speaking out of intuition. I'm speaking out of the research. There have been folks who have been doing research on adolescent development, and they have told us time and time again over the last 25 and 30 years that if we as a community can provide children with positive school environments, vocational skills training, structured extracurricular activities in our neighborhoods, address the mental health needs of our children, provide our children with a sense of positive self-worth, and help our children identify positive, supportive, mentoring relationships, we can redirect our children without the court system. So.
My message to you once again is the smartphone, okay? This is critically important. Police officers have technology in their car. They have computers, they have all kinds of whiz-bang systems in their car. You have technology on your person, you just have to use it. And your technology can be just as effective as a police officer's technology. Please, 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 young people, when you communicate with police, even if you're walking, even if you're stopped, turn this thing on. Record that conversation. You have the right to record a police officer in the performance of his public duties. Please use this system to obtain information. In terms of accountability, I happen to sue our outgoing state's attorney in Baltimore City because he was engaging in selective prosecution. So I figured out that he made a mistake that I think was very substantial, whereas he failed to prosecute this white gentleman who had assaulted a law professor in Baltimore City and decided to prosecute the law professor. And I found a little piece of law that should end up being helpful in that case. But when a prosecutor is engaged in what's considered a ministerial duty or an investigative duty, they can be prosecuted for misconduct under Section 1983. Now, if they're engaged in their performance of their prosecutorial duties, they cannot be prosecuted, and their discretion is wide and large, but it is not unfettered. It is not unfettered. They can be prosecuted if they engage in some investigative conduct. In this particular case, in Maryland, they have what they call a reviewing attorney, who basically investigates claims of individuals. For instance, in the case of this case with two neighbors disputing over having a dispute over loud music, one being black, the other one being white, equally justified in whatever conduct they engaged in, or equally unjustified, except for the white individual came over to the black individual's home, banged on his door, and assaulted him right in the threshold of his doorway. Well, the white individual, the case against him was dismissed, and the case against my client, who basically pushed him out of his doorway and shut the door behind him, he was being prosecuted for an assault. And that assault charge was dropped against the white individual, and we went on for months and months and months before they decided to drop the assault charge against the African American. So that's another one of these high-profile cases that I'm doing. I don't think anybody sues the prosecutor's office in a long time for something like this, exercising their own discretion, but the Royal lawyer will do it. I'm not afraid to do it, and however the chips may fall, I may win, I may lose, but you know what? You're going to think twice before you try that again. And sometimes it's not all in the winning, it's all in the putting the pressure on them to let them know that somebody's watching and somebody cares. So with that said, yeah, smartphones, I know I'm talking a lot of smartphones. Use these things. Thank you.
Amen. And we thank you, because at the bottom of his remarks, or one of the undercurrents in what he says is zealous advocacy, that our system requires an adversarial process. And part of that adversarial process comes from us all speaking up to let them know that we're not just going to sit back and let things happen, but we're going to be involved and engaged to make sure that we help make things happen, the things that we want to happen. So thank you all. We want to thank our panel. Amen. I want to apologize, and this is an apology in a good ways, because we've had a lot of information, we've had a lot of interest. We pray that we can bring all of them back to do a program, a similar program in the future, and maybe on more focused issues, as we do have your cards, your interests, and we want to follow up. We've heard a lot about smartphones. Now we want to have the U.S. Attorney's Office to come and give their take on how we survived the police stop. Do you?
Would you join me again in thanking our panel? Thank you very much. We are encouraged that our new Attorney General takes seriously the difference in dealing with children and with adults. And we want to support you, sir, and thank you very much. And you've been here before. We're always glad to see you. Professor Henning's passion is palpable. We thank God for her, knowing that she's working on behalf of our young people. And also, Mr. Gordon, I probably need to hire you, sir. Thank you very much. We appreciate you all. Thank you so much. And let me say this, as you are departing the sanctuary, if you are appreciative of what we're doing, there's some baskets in the back. We will receive whatever you're willing to give so that we can continue to do this type of programming. If you have enjoyed it, put your hands together. You know, again, that we need your support to continue doing this. Stay put. Don't leave yet. Stay with us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I know we're short on time, so we're going to try to really stick to the points. This is a really informative presentation, so I know there's a number of you who are leaving. I know we're short on time, but for those who can stay, I really think it'll be worth your while. My name is Jami Hodge. I'm a community prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office here in D.C. With me is Roger Kemp, and he's also a community prosecutor. I serve in the 5th District, and Roger serves in the 3rd District. And you heard from our boss, Ron Machin, about our community outreach section. The one thing I just wanted to point out real quick in response to Judge Barnett's comment about the youth court, although we don't prosecute juveniles unless they're charged as an adult, we're very involved in intervention and prevention when it comes to our youth. And our office does participate in a youth court. I'm sure one of our staff or our boss, Wendy Polehouse, who runs our community outreach section, can be in touch about what we do in terms of youth court and how maybe we can work together. Yes, sir. So now we're going to basically turn to the presentation. What we're going to talk about today is how do you deal with the police in a street encounter? So when you are pulled over by the police, what are your rights? What can you do? What are they allowed to do? If it's a bad interaction, what can you do after? And so we're going to start by talking about, we're going to talk about it in 3 parts. Before you encounter the police on the street, what are some things you can do to know who the police are in your district, to know who the commanders, the lieutenants, the ones who are calling the shots, who do you report to when you run into a bad officer? So we're going to talk about before. For during, there's a wonderful video that's on YouTube by Billy Murphy. He's a defense lawyer and former judge in Maryland. He put together this wonderful YouTube video. We're going to show a 10-minute clip. I think it's actually about a 30-minute video. We don't have time to show it in its entirety, but we strongly encourage everyone to go and watch the full video when you have some time, and we'll use that and talk about his key points to remember about what you can and can't do during the street encounter. And then we're going to talk about after. What can you do when you've had a bad encounter with the police on the streets, when you feel your rights have been violated? Who do you call? You don't call, we normally call 911 when we need help, but who do you call when the police are the ones who have violated you or somehow done something to you to harm you? So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Roger to talk about before.
Good morning. When the Metropolitan Police Department instituted its community policing program, it set up various numbers of PSAs in each police district. PSAs stand for Patrol Service Areas. It provided a level of consistency, so if you live in a particular neighborhood, it's more likely than not that you'll have the same group of police officers that will respond to your calls. You will know them, they may know you. There are a total of 56 PSAs in the District of Columbia. Each district has somewhere between, say, 6 and 8 PSAs. The PSAs meet on a monthly basis. That meeting is presided over by a lieutenant. That's very important because the lieutenant is somebody who is responsible for that particular PSA and is going to report to the commander and report to the chief of police. A PSA is a patrol service agency, and it's geographically designed, and it'll essentially be a certain area. It could be a commercial or a residential area, and it may have similar problems, whether it's a problem with burglaries or a problem with shopliftings. It's designed so that the officers who respond are specifically aware of the concerns of that particular community. Okay, there's also the Citizens Advisory Council. The Citizens Advisory Council are directly report to the Chief of Police. An example of a Citizens Advisory Council meeting, they meet on a monthly basis. The commander will report to the CAC, and he will start off giving crime reports. We'll talk about the arrests that were made and crime stats. He'll also hear from the community. He'll hear people talk about how perhaps in a particular alley there's been a number of break-ins, and he'll try to develop a policy, develop a patrolling policy that'll meet the needs of that community. He can also hear about particular concerns that the citizens may have about perhaps having more policing at a certain location. For instance, he may hear that a church or a group lets out on Thursday afternoons or Friday afternoons at a certain time, and they may be able to ask the chief, could you please beef up your patrol so you can provide a certain level of protection. It's not unusual for members of the U.S. Attorney's Office to be at these meetings, and we can also share information at these meetings about particular convictions. There might be a case that has gone to a trial and it's been a conviction that is of particular interest to a neighborhood. And the neighborhood might want to weigh into the sentencing judge and talk a little bit about special concerns they have about that case. Particularly, maybe they may have some special information on what the judge should think about in terms of whether or not that particular charged individual should have substance abuse counseling, or perhaps family therapy, or mental health counseling. There's something called a community impact statement where the prosecutors who attend these meetings will help anybody, whether it's somebody who's interested in leniency or otherwise, relay those thoughts to the sentencing judge by way of something called a community impact statement. And those are the types of things that can be dealt with at the CAC meetings.
The reason we're talking about PSAs, patrol service areas, the PSA meetings, and the CAC meetings is because it's so important to get to know your police and your police commanders and your police leadership in times of calm. When the incident happens, of course, feelings are heightened, and it becomes oftentimes at that point more adversarial. So what we encourage, why we're telling you about these meetings and about these opportunities to get to know those who run the police department and run the police who are patrolling in your particular area, is because if you have that relationship, then it's a lot easier to know who to call and who to report to when you have a problem. If you don't know what your PSA, your patrol service area is that you live in, you live in Ward 4, you live in the 2nd Ward, but you don't know what PSA is that, you can go on mpdc.gov, you can plug in your address, and you can find out who your police lieutenant is for your patrol service area and which PSA it is that you live in. So basically, the way it is there's police on the street. Those are your patrol officers. Above them are sergeants. Above the sergeants are the lieutenants. So the lieutenants wear the white shirts. They report directly to captains and the commander. If you know your lieutenant, you will be able to reach out to them. Most lieutenants, in fact, if you go on the MPD website, you're going to find their direct number. You're going to find their email address. And as we'll talk a little bit through these slides, we'll get to a slide where we talk about the listservs that you can get on. MPD really has, just like our office is focused on community outreach, there's been a big push from Chief Lanier for them to be responsive to community concerns. So when you go to your CAC meeting, it will be the commander, the one who runs that whole entire station, who's going to be at that meeting to answer your questions and address your concerns. If you send an email to the listserv, it's going to be a lieutenant, it's going to be a sergeant, it's going to be someone with responsibility who's responding, and we can go ahead and go to the next slide, who'll be responding to that concern. So you have access to them. And we just encourage you, before an incident happens, to know who those people are that you can reach out to. So this is a list of all the commanders in the city. Again, this is on mpdc.gov, but here, we're here in the 2nd District. The commander is Michael Reese. And I'll just point out, Trina, if you can stand, Trina Carrington, for those who live in this area, is our community prosecutor assigned to the 2nd District. And we'll get to a slide about us, about our office and how to reach us, but if you can't figure out who it is that's your commander, your lieutenant, our office can help you with that. The next slide. So this is another way. Every district has a listserv where you can sign up. You'll get information about crime trends, crime prevention tips, if there's an active, a lot of times people will get on, I saw a bunch of police officers, I heard a helicopter, what's going on? And you'll have someone in leadership at the police station respond and tell you, okay, we're investigating a robbery. They'll give arrest reports. It's a lot of information about what's going on in your particular neighborhood. And you would not be surprised to have Assistant Chief Grooms or Chief Lanier responding directly, not just the commanders, but those who are running the whole police department on these listservs. So if you're not on your listserv, we absolutely encourage you to sign up.
I think we're ready for the...
Nope.
As part of our community prosecution section that was instituted when Eric Holder was the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, a community prosecutor who's an assistant U.S. attorney, typically an experienced assistant U.S. attorney that was assigned to each district. Along with that assistant U.S. attorney who's the community prosecutor, there's also a community outreach specialist. We're actually in the district. We're in each police station, and one of the things we do is we actually reach out to schools. I would venture to say that every school in the District of Columbia has had some contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office by one of the community outreach specialists or one of the community prosecutors. Yeah. Let's go into the video.
And so that last slide was just our contact information, but downstairs there's a table that's staffed by the U.S. Attorney's Office where you can pick up a list. It has all of our phone numbers, email addresses. Okay, so next we're going to introduce the clip from Billy Murphy to talk about what you can do during a police encounter.
Good evening, my friends. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Billy Murphy, and we're going to talk about how to deal with the police. I've been a judge, but I'm best known as a criminal defense lawyer. I know how the law works, and I know that for many people, the law sometimes doesn't work. But I'm going to show you how to make the law work for you. I see how the choices my clients make have a massive impact on the outcomes of their police encounters, even if, and especially if, you've done nothing wrong. There are lots of good police out there doing what needs to be done, and I don't need to tell you that there are also too many cops who don't respect the basic rights of innocent people. But you don't get to choose who you're dealing with, and even the nicest cop will use your mistakes against you. That's precisely why every citizen, every one of you, must possess the tools to confidently assert your rights if you have to. By the show of hands, who's here because either you, a friend, or a family member has been on the business end of a bad police encounter? Then you're in the right place. Who's got a story they want to share with the class? What's your story?
I got hassled by Highway Patrol the other day.
Tell us about that.
When that money talk, the block won't hear you. Ride with a rider, it'll be like...
I was ready to explode. This was like the 4th time this year I've been pulled over for nothing.
License and registration?
Yeah, I know the drill, man.
Excuse me?
License? Registration.
No need for the attitude there, bro. I'm looking out for your safety and everyone else's on this road.
Whatever, man.
Okay, step out of the vehicle for me. Turn around and put your hands in the air. Turn around and put your hands in the air.
Gosh, man.
Walk forward. Walk forward. Hands on the hood. Hands on the hood of the car. Do it. Spread your legs.
What are you doing, man?
Relax.
I didn't do anything.
Relax.
I didn't do anything.
You got a bad attitude. Now, I pulled you over because you were swerving between lanes. That's all. Now, you got a choice here. If you cooperate, you're going to make things a whole lot easier on yourself. Now, what that means is you got to be straight with me. You understand?
Yeah.
Here's the deal. You don't speak unless I ask a question. You understand?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, that hurts, man. That's too tight.
Relax. You're fine. Now, where are you coming from?
College. I'm coming home from college, man.
You've been having problems with gangs moving guns down this highway. You're not packing any Tech 9s in there, are you?
No, sir.
So you don't mind if I take a look?
Go ahead.
All right, Darren, you just relax. Don't move. All right, stand up. Stand up. Walk back with me. Keep walking. Keep walking. All right, have a seat. Have a seat, Darren. Now cross your legs. Cross your legs!
And when that cop was done roughing me up, he made me sit there like a dog while he ripped up my car. I've got nothing to hide, but that's disrespectful.
All right, you sit tight.
I sat there forever while he hung out in his car.
All right, Darren, stand up. Stand up. Turn around. This is a citation for excessive lane change. You take care of this as soon as possible. Sign that. Sign it. Here's your copy. Get your off my road.
That cop profiled me. It's ridiculous. I go to school. I'm not a gun trafficker.
I know exactly how you feel, man. That's why we're here. It's certainly possible you were profiled, but it's practically impossible to prove that. You never know for sure what's going on in an officer's head. I hate to say it, but from what I hear, it sounds like you broke the first rule of dealing with the police. Always be calm and cool.
Hold up, are you saying that he deserved to get treated like that?
No, what I'm saying is a police encounter is absolutely the worst time and place to vent your frustrations about police. Getting stopped by police is always frustrating and scary, but you could have played it much smarter by being calm and cool. As soon as you opened your mouth, you failed the attitude test.
License and registration?
Yeah, I know the drill, man.
Your attitude only got worse.
Whatever, man.
Don't ever talk back.
Step out of the car.
Don't ever raise your voice. Don't ever use profanity with a police officer.
Turn around and put your hands in the air.
Being hostile with police is stupid and dangerous. You can't win that game on the street where they're the king. Police have a dangerous job. Even the most professional officers might become aggressive if they feel threatened or if their authority is challenged. Always control your words, the tone of your voice, and your body language. If you're visibly scared and angry, it's easy for an officer to get scared and angry too. Things could have turned out way worse than they did.
Now! On your stomach! On your stomach!
Can you think of a better way you could have greeted that officer?
Good evening, officer. How's it going?
That's better. Calm and cool.
Hold on. What's all this polite talk? They don't respect us, so why should we respect them?
For real.
This isn't just about respect, it's about common sense. If you don't check your ego at the door, and you let it take control of you during a police encounter, you'll regret it every time. Following the rules doesn't guarantee that the police will respect your rights, but they can keep you from digging yourself into a deeper hole. Let's talk about what your rights are in the first place. This is the Bill of Rights. These are the first 10 amendments that were added to the U.S. Constitution after it was ratified in 1789. These rights are protected under federal law, which means everything we're talking about today applies in all 50 states. There are 3 amendments in particular that protect your rights during police encounters. The 4th Amendment states that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. The 5th Amendment states that no person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. During a police encounter, the smartest way to take the 5th is just to keep your mouth shut, because you always have the right to remain silent. We'll talk in a minute about how this works. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. So if the police interrogate or arrest you, asking for a lawyer is a good way to assert your right to remain silent. Lawyer up. That's right. Regardless of what you have seen on TV, police don't usually have to read you your rights, even if you're arrested. So it's up to you to make sure that you understand the law and make smart choices. If police flag you down, pull over immediately, turn off your car, and place your hands on the wheel. The police like to see your hands for their own safety, so wait until they request your paperwork before reaching for it. At night, it's also a good idea to turn on the interior light so that the officer can see you're not armed. Darren, do you see any ways you could have handled yourself better?
Good evening, officer. How's it going?
Did you know you were swerving between lanes?
No, officer.
Let me see your license and registration.
Sure. My license. Here's my registration.
Now, Darren, we've had some problems with gangs moving guns down this highway. You're not packing any Tech 9s, are you?
No, sir.
I didn't think so. So you don't mind if I take a look, do you?
Officer, I know you're just doing your job. I don't have any guns or whatever, but I don't consent to searches.
Okay, so we, again, for time purposes, we just have to show a clip. But what would have happened next was the next rule, the next key point from Billy Murphy, which is you have the right to refuse to be searched. And in him describing it and talking to the audience there, he says, say the words, I do not consent to searches, so that it's very clear and unambiguous if you do not want to be searched and you're not consenting to a search. And so I'm just going to go through, there were several key points to remember that or rules, I think he called them rules. I'm just going to run through the ones he covered and then the ones that would have been covered later in the video. The first, and let me just stop here for a second. The reason, and he mentioned it briefly about, police officers have a dangerous job, but the reason these rules are, that he gives this advice, and we believe this is important advice, that's why we're also trying to get the message out, is because Traffic stops are probably one of the most dangerous situations police officers are put in, because, and especially at night, when they are walking up to a car, yes, it could be average citizen who just committed a minor traffic violation, but there are many people, many criminals that are carrying guns, have ill intent towards anybody, let alone a police officer approaching them and stopping them from what they do. And research has found that many police killings, a lot of harm to police come from traffic stops. In fact, it's why the Supreme Court allows police officers to order people out of a car. For any minor traffic offense, they can order an average citizen out of the car, and it's really because it is such a dangerous situation for police officers to put themselves in. So that's why there are all these rules. And we know, yes, there are bad police officers out there, but believe it or not, there are some good ones who are just trying to do their job and go home at night, back to their families. So his first is try your best to remain calm and cool. The second was you have the right to remain silent, and he talked about that. The third one he talked about, or what we were just seeing at the end of the clip, is that you don't have to consent to a search. I think sometimes people don't know that. Police are often going to ask, but you don't have to consent. Just make sure that refusal is unambiguous. I do not consent to a search. The fourth piece of advice he gives is to ask the police officer if you're free to go. If it's a minor stop and they just need to write the ticket, or it's what we call a contact, police officers can just come up to you on the street and ask you how you're doing, ask you your name. You need to figure out, do you have to stay and interact with the police officer, or are you free to go? And the best way to figure that out is to ask the question. And if you're free to go and you don't want to participate in the interaction, then leave. The next one is don't run from the police. And there's a lot of common sense reasons for that. Just don't run. Interact with them. Find out if you are free to go, and if you are free to go, then go, but don't run. Never touch the police, because again, it's gonna lead to an escalated situation. Billy Murphy said, if you act hostile and angry and scared, it's going to quickly make that officer, even the most professional of officers, worry about their safety and in turn act hostile and scared. So don't touch them. Follow police commands. And this one is tough, especially if you believe that the stop is wrong, if you believe that you're being mistreated. Why should you have to do what they're telling you to do? You just need to do it, because no matter what, even for the worst of officers out there, what we want most of all is for everybody to be safe at the end of that interaction. They carry weapons for a reason. And so he showed in his clip how an alternative scenario that could have happened with that young man who was pulled over if there had been a more trigger-happy officer who was willing to use one of his weapons. So follow their commands. Now, if you find out after the fact, or let's say you follow the commands and once the interaction is over and you feel like everything about it was completely unjustified, there are things you can do. And Roger's going to talk about that. But please, the most important thing is to survive the interaction. You can't do anything if you're hurt or shot or killed. So you follow all police commands. I don't know if we're going to take questions now. No. Right, Did they not also relax the criteria to police can search cars, saying that privacy did not extend to cars? What is the status of that? Okay, for those who may not have heard the question, she asked about what I mentioned in terms of the Supreme Court allowing police to ask people out of the car, and then asking about the right to search automobiles. Okay, so yes. The Fourth Amendment, and we just, because of short time, I can't go into detail, but like your home, your body are way up here. You know, they've got to have a lot to be able to search your house. They need to get a warrant. They need to have a judge sign off on it. An automobile is, because it's transient's nature, it's not going to stay there in time for them to go get a warrant. It does not mean that they just have the right to search willy-nilly. You still have to have probable cause that a crime is either being committed or it's just been committed in order to conduct a search. If they don't have that, now they just may ask, like in this situation, for consent. He didn't have any probable cause that this guy was carrying weapons, but he asked for consent. The issue is most people don't, or I think many people don't realize they can say no. And so here this guy said, yeah, no, I don't have anything. Yeah, you can search. And then it became a very humiliating experience as he's sitting on the side of the road while this guy is throwing out the stuff from his car. So yes, there is a difference, but you don't, usually I would say the average citizen probably, if you're not doing anything illegal, they're not going to have probable cause to search, but they may ask. Okay, I'm going to turn over to Roger for what you can do after.
In the District of Columbia, the Chief of Police has said that public complaints is typically the best way to prevent police misconduct, and that's so true. I can give an anecdote in the 3rd District where I am the community prosecutor. An elderly, a senior man who attends CAC meetings and PSA meetings, actually somebody who was a former police officer many years ago, had an encounter with a police officer and believes he wasn't spoken to in an appropriate manner. And he gave that information to the commander of the 3rd District. What that commander did was he invited that individual to a PSA meeting and to a CAC meeting and specifically required that officer to attend. And his thought was, he had heard complaints before. He thought maybe if this was something that's an ongoing process, one thing, if it was accurate, maybe the officer could be embarrassed. The other thing is, his position was, this isn't anything that has to be put under the rug. He doesn't want his other police officers to think that's appropriate. So that's nothing that has to be dealt with in private or behind closed doors. He wanted to discuss it. He wanted this very well-meaning senior to explain why he was there and how he was spoken to, what his reaction was, so that some of the other officers can be part of that conversation. However, there is something called the Office of Police Complaints. The Office of Police Complaints, the most important thing to remember is the Office of Police Complaints in the District of Columbia is a separate entity than the Metropolitan Police Department. It's separate. It's not controlled by the Metropolitan Police Department or in fact, any other agency. It's an independent agency, and it hears anything from situations where people are unnecessarily rude, police officers are unnecessarily rude, or where they profile individuals, or any type of complaint. These types of complaints are then reported to the Chief of Police. It was mentioned earlier in one of the panels about the number of recordings and videos that are taken. If you're going to make a presentation to the Office of Police Complaints, people are very often very mad and upset, and perhaps rightfully so. But in making a presentation, what's important is to be calm, to get all the information you have, all the witnesses you have, all the videotape you may have from a smartphone, and make that case. The Office of Police Complaints, they hear many cases, but they have to focus on evidence. They can't just focus on how upset an individual is that makes a presentation. But you need to you need to understand that ultimately their finding is presented to the Chief of Police, who will make a determination based on, or will take action and can take punishment. And that punishment can be a wide range of things. That punishment can be suspension, loss of pay, it can be firing. Yes, ma'am? I think the question was, what power do they have? The Office of Police Complaints, that's what they do. They make recommendations to the Chief of Police, who has firing ability. The Office of Police Complaints don't have the direct ability to suspend an officer. But it's been it's been the experience of the Office of Police Complaints that the Chief of Police does take action based on their findings, particularly if there are repeated findings. And you can only get those repeated findings that Judge Murphy talks about if people don't keep these incidents a secret. If they have to come forward so there can be a history. The Office of Police Complaints can develop a history because of the number of complaints against a particular officer. So that's actually key to come forward.
Okay, I'll do the last slide. So there are also some other alternatives in addition to the Office of Police Complaints. You can always go to the station, that district station where the incident occurred, and file a complaint there. And when you go to the counter, I would recommend you ask for an official so that you're going to get someone in police leadership to hear your complaint. And then the station, within that, the commanders, within that chain of command, they will do their own investigation and also can issue some type of punishment as necessary. In addition, within MPD is the Internal Affairs Division, and they automatically investigate any major use of force. So anytime a gun is used, anytime sort of OC spray, the batons, anything that leads to serious use of force, they're going to automatically do an internal investigation of that officer. In addition to that, in addition to MPD, all the law enforcement agencies in DC are able to refer to our office any criminal conduct of basically where a police officer has violated someone's civil rights. So we have, and I think Ron actually talked about that earlier in his remarks on the panel, an internal unit that's what they do. They prosecute police officers for misconduct. And then finally, there's been a lot of talk in that first panel about discretion that our office exercises. One of the ways that we exercise discretion, and Roger and I are two of the sort of group of senior lawyers, and Trina too, who screen the arrest. So when the police make the arrest, they have to come present the case to our office, and then we make that decision whether or not to charge. Well, in addition to criminal history and the facts, and one of the things that we will take into consideration always is whether or not a person's rights were violated. So if how they found the drugs on the person was an illegal search, we are not going forward with that case. That case is going to be dismissed, or it's not even brought, so it's not dismissed. We call it no papered. In addition, our office tracks officers who have a history of misconduct, and there are different steps we take within an office on whether or not we will rely on that officer in terms of testimony, in terms of their investigation, if they develop this history of misconduct. So there are steps that we take in addition to those that Roger discussed with the Office of Police Complaints. So at this point, we're going to stop. Is Reverend Newton nearby? I'm not sure. I think I'll just turn it back over to you at this point. Thanks.
Amen. Praise the Lord. Very important information, and again, there is information available downstairs as well as refreshments downstairs. Right now, I'm going to turn the mic over to the pastor of Metropolitan for closing remarks. Thank you so much.
Again, we thank you all for your presence today. Would you join me in thanking the internal team that made this happen, the logistics, the invitations, the food, the brothers from Kappa Alpha Psi, the sisters of AKA who helped us as well. Just a wonderful congregation, worked hard to pull this off and to ensure your hospitality. Let us now all stand. The brilliant prophet Isaiah wrote in the 61st chapter, first verse, "For I, the Lord, love justice." The Lord loves justice. We pray that you would make this city a just place, this nation a just place, that you would use each and every one of us as agents of your justice and your peace, and that we would be in the vanguard of the new world as it bursts forth. In the holy name of your Son we pray. Amen. Thank you all very much.